On behalf of the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and the Northeast Region Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy Committee, we would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Fire Departments and Wildland Fire. This webinar is the product of a partnership with the Engaging Local Fire Departments Work Group of the Northeast Regional Strategy Committee and the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. The Northeast Regional Strategy Committee is committed to the vision of the National Wildland Fire Management Cohesive Strategy to, as a nation, better live with wildland fire. The Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network is a national network of people working to build sustainable wildfire resilience capacity in fire-prone communities by empowering leaders, resourcing strategic action, developing tools, and creating and sharing approaches to increase wildfire resilience. You can learn more about both of those entities through the links in the chat box. My name is Annie Schmidt, and together with Emily Troisi at FACnet, we are excited to support the committee's work and excited to help host today's webinar. Over the course of the next 90 minutes, we will have the opportunity to hear from two people working on the ground to help improve their community wildfire resilience. We will then transition to a panel of national program experts ready to share how their programs, tools, and resources can help you better prepare your community for wildland fire. And finally, we will explore the next steps for wildfire resilience in the Northeast region. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the National Wildland Fire Cohesive Strategy, or Cohesive Strategy, as it's often called, it sets forth an ambitious vision to fundamentally change the way we approach wildland fire. The Cohesive Strategy is a product of the Flame Act passed in 2009, which gave direction for the development of a cohesive national approach to wildland fire. The vision, as you see on your screen, is to safely and effectively extinguish fire when needed, use fire where allowable, manage our natural resources, and as a nation, live with wildland fire. The Northeast Regional Strategy Committee is one of 3 regional committees nationwide working to collaboratively implement the vision of the cohesive strategy. The Northeast Regional Committee is comprised of diverse partners representing multiple federal agencies, tribal nations, state forestry agencies, emergency managers, fire chiefs, joint fire exchanges, the National Volunteer Fire Council, nonprofit organizations like the Nature Conservancy, private industry, and others. The cohesive strategy sets forth 3 goals: resilient landscapes, fire adapted communities, and safe and effective wildfire response. The key with all of these goals is that they are in fact cohesive. The 3 goals of the cohesive strategy work together in concert and fueled by science. Fire departments are uniquely positioned to draw the pieces of the cohesive strategy together. Obviously, fire departments are integral to safe and effective response. But what about resilient landscapes and fire adapted communities? Fire departments have a role to play there too. Resilient landscapes are capable of withstanding the impacts of wildland fire. Forest management practices, including prescribed fire, can support these landscapes. Many departments participate in prescribed fire in their area, helping to restore fire and ensure that future wildland fires are more in line with their historic counterparts. Fire adapted communities understand their risk and are taking action to better prepare for, respond to, and recover from wildland fire. Fire department personnel are often trusted members of the community and an incredibly important piece of creating fire adapted communities. Some departments have chosen to engage in fire adaptation by working directly with residents to evaluate their homes and businesses and provide structure hardening recommendations. Other departments have taken a leadership role, convening partners and residents to better plan for wildland fire through the creation of community wildfire protection plans, creating potential operational delineations, or working in a local wildfire coordinating group. The point is that fire departments don't exist in any single goal of the cohesive strategy, but rather in all 3 goals. Fortunately, fire departments aren't in this work alone. Our whole communities, residents, businesses, utility companies, health districts, researchers, agency partners, and more all have a role. The Northeast Regional Strategy Committee's Engaging Local Fire Departments work group is hosting this webinar in response to their 2019 survey of close to 900 fire department members in the Midwest and Northeast. As we all know, wildfire is a fact of life across the country. Almost 98% of those 900 respondents indicated in that 2019 survey that they had responded to a wildfire in their jurisdiction. 2/3 of respondents were not familiar with the cohesive strategy, hence the brief overview I've shared here today. Almost half of the respondents indicated that they were interested in learning more about how to reduce their community's wildfire risk before a fire started. Today's webinar is designed to help do just that. We have two great practitioners ready to talk with all of you about how they are improving their community's resilience before a wildfire starts. And 56% of respondents were interested in learning more about available resources and information. And lucky for all of you, we have a fantastic panel of national experts here to share their resources, programs, and information. So that survey really transitioned into our goals for today. We hope to create a shared understanding of the cohesive strategy, to learn from practitioners working in their communities to reduce wildfire risk before a fire starts, and to share available resources, programs, information, and opportunities so that you in your place can help achieve part of that cohesive wildland fire strategy vision to better live with wildfire. So with that, we are going to transition to the opportunity to hear from two practitioners who are helping their community better live with wildland fire. We will have two 15-minute presentations followed by questions and answers. Please, as our presenters are speaking, do feel free to place your questions for them in the chat box, and we will be collecting those questions and prompting our presenters during the 10-minute question and answer period immediately following their presentations. Our first presenter today is Dave Celino. Dave has a degree in forestry and surveying from Paul Smith College in the Adirondack region of New York. He started his career out of college as a professional timber faller in Southwest Colorado in the early 80s before returning to New England, where he worked as a Massachusetts licensed forester, running his own business. In addition to forestry, he spent 30 years in the fire service, becoming a member of the Massachusetts Wildfire Crew, and was a municipal fire chief for the town of Coleraine, Massachusetts. In 2007, Mr. Celino brought his land management and firefighting experience to the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation as the chief fire warden, where he remains today. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to you, Dave.
Great, thank you, Annie. And just a test for the audio, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. And
you can see the screen, I assume?
Absolutely.
Great, all right, well, good afternoon, everybody. And actually good late morning to our friends on the West Coast for anybody from the West that has joined us. And we certainly hope that there are some folks from the West. And the other part of the introduction, great introduction, Annie. I really appreciate the accolades on that. I'm also the chair for the Northeast RSC, and so, you know, one of the folks, along with some folks on the call, that are responsible for trying to pull this really what we think is some pretty cool information to share with our folks throughout this network. And I'm going to share just a really brief presentation on a success story coming out of the little state of Massachusetts over the last really 2 years. And this was shared at the National Cohesive Strategy Workshop last year that was done virtually. We had a forum of folks with local success stories under goal number 3, effective and safe wildfire response. And mine is really about finding and training crews from local fire departments. It's the root of where I come from. I never try to forget where I came from, and those roots as a call volunteer fire chief for about 6 years in that role, and the challenges that we faced in trying to recruit and keep people and train and, you know, face all the needs that are coming at us. And so That, hence is the title of the presentation. Necessity is the mother of invention. And those of you that are involved in the fire service certainly know exactly what I'm talking about. And the picture there is a picture of Chief John Lynch from the Fall River, Massachusetts Fire Department, myself at a prescribed burn. And Chief Lynch understands the value of our long relationship between the state agency, Wildland Fire Agency, and his town. By the way, to set the stage in Massachusetts, the local fire departments, the local fire chief has jurisdiction over all fire response, even on state lands. And so this is connected, as we mentioned, with the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy under National Goal number 3, Safe and Effective Wildfire Response. We feel like we have a really good story to tell from the Northeast. We do have a lot of fires, which you'll see. And we feel like we bring to the table that close working relationship between state and local fire departments and our Fed resources as well, although we don't have a lot of Fed resources in the Northeast as much as they do in the western part of the country. So I wanted to kind of set the stage for you in terms of what 2020 brought to New England. And it was in drought, and it was in this little corner of the country that we saw extreme drought levels in southeastern Massachusetts. We saw moderate to severe drought across the rest of the New England states. And with that brought some super challenges. And, you know, that's just in fire behavior and fire response. Forget about the addition of COVID and what that brought upon all of the emergency services across the country. And then having to manage this. Our fire season started at the beginning of April, and it did not end until snow in November. And this shows you the National Drought Monitor on September 29th. And September 29th, in particular, Rhode Island, Eastern Connecticut, Central and Southeastern Massachusetts in the Pine Barrens, second most volatile fuel type in the country. The second, the chaparral. And, you know, we were sitting on some potentially really bad situations for us in terms of large fire growth. Our Keach-Byram drought indexes, the fire drought index was hitting above 600 in those areas out of 800. In that time, just to kind of show you our part of our story, and this is a challenge, this is what'll keep the state fire supervisor up at night. There was one week, the week of September 28th, where we had, actually this shows 15, but we had over 15 fires that we were sitting on in multiple operational periods. It's really a tribute to that partnership of the local fire departments with the help from the state forest fire resources to babysit and keep those fires contained at very small sizes. But it was a challenge. Most of these fires were burning upwards of 2 feet into the ground. They remained very active, and they were very labor intensive. And we did have a number of fires during that year that broke out, but we didn't lose anything, you know, into that. The largest fire we had was 70 acres through the year, and we were able to really keep things contained and manageable, but boy, it was a challenge. And so that just showed the situation we were in by September. Here's a little bit of data on fire occurrence. It's kind of interesting. It's fun to share this nationally. And this is just the New England states fire occurrence last year. In last year's fire season, it kind of gives you some numbers by states as we collected through the State Foresters database. And in Massachusetts, we topped out at 1,356 fires. Actually, that is, excuse me, turn off the radio. We've had a few fires today, believe it or not. And actually, that number is even about average for us. We've had years where we've gone as far as over 2,000 wildland fires in a year. We're past the history of large fire growth in New England. There was a time back up through the 60s and 70s that it was not uncommon for us to get 1,000+ acre fire growth across the landscape. But we've, technology and changes in weather pattern, the sizes of our fires have come down. Fire occurrence has not. And so staffing levels plays into this story. And this shows you some staffing levels that are both long year-round staff and seasonal. And so once I bring on my 48 seasonals, we're capped out at about 64 fire staff for the entire state, servicing 13 fire districts across the state. And it shows you some of the other state numbers. I know most of those numbers in Connecticut are not fire staff. They're park staff or forestry staff that are trained in fire and brought on when they're really needed for a fire incident. And so it brings us to sort of our little story about the mother of invention, and that's necessity. And we know that history can tend to repeat itself. And so what happens here is we happen to hit an opportunistic time with a rewrite of our statewide fire and EMS mobilization plan. And that allowed us to actually take an opportunity to look at this fire mode plan. I believe every state has one, and to look at where we need to grow, where we need to mature in terms of, all incidents. But of course, my focus was on the wildland fire response. And so our state emergency management agency is sort of the caretaker of this plan. And they contracted the services out to rewrite this plan with a pretty good sized committee, an advisory board to help get this done. And I was part of it representing Wildland Fire. So it was a good collaborative effort. So it was state emergency management, it was the State Department of Fire Services, which also includes the state fire marshal and our state fire academy. It was my bureau, the Bureau of Forest Fire Control under the Department of Conservation and Recreation. There are 14 fire districts in Massachusetts, and each one of those has a district coordinator from one of the, anywhere from 23 to 30 towns that make up, a fire district at any one location. And then the Fire Chiefs Association plays a major role as well. Big players, of course, because they hold that jurisdiction, whether they like it or not. And I'll go back to that. I reiterate it on every presentation that I do. And in some audiences that include fire chiefs, it's really surprising to find out that even some of the fire chiefs are surprised to find out they have jurisdiction on wildland fire. And that's very important. And it's very important that they have a voice in this and that we cooperate with them. So in discussions with this, and over the years, I've been in this position for about 15 years now, and through numerous, what seems like hundreds of mobilizations over the years, we are always hearing the same resources, the task forces. There was a time, I can remember 6 years ago, we had a 45-acre wildland fire. It was pretty remote, inaccessible, and the chief called for a task force from the next district over, and we got a task force. We got that included a few brush trucks, it included a couple of tankers, it included ladder trucks and ladder companies, and and some ambulances, because why? That was what the task force list was made up of on the statewide fire mode plan. And so when we had a chance to sit down as a collaborative effort, it gave me an opportunity to start to talk about how we can manipulate and maybe change and edit this plan to make it more useful and actually provide maybe sort of a more useful, successful resource, but also a wise use of resources across the geographic area. An example is we don't want to take ladder trucks out of municipal city areas where they're meant to be there protecting values at risk on their city streets. And so that gave us a chance to talk about strike teams of wildland fire response, like Type 6 engines. And then we got into the discussion about hand crews. And, in many cases, when we get the need for wildland fire resources. It's in inaccessible areas. Type 6 engines don't even work for us. New England can have some pretty rugged country. We still do. And even we still have thousands of acres that are undeveloped and inaccessible by equipment. And so we'll call out for the strike team or the task force, really with the intent only of meeting those bodies and boots on the ground to go in and work the fire and work the perimeter. The problem is we've never been able to get really a focused, trained resource on scene. We get what we get. We hope that we get trained and experienced folks, and we make the best of it. This gave us an opportunity to up that bar a little bit, and we've had some success. And so we developed the Forestry Hand Crew. That's the name of the resource in the new version of the Massachusetts Fire and EMS Mode Plan. And it has one crew leader. It has 10 to 20 firefighters and some transportation vehicles. This is the first time we put in qualifications, and this is a hard sell to some fire personnel and some fire chiefs on that board. And so it's simply the 130, 190 course, 190 and L180, or the successful completion of our DCR course. And then crew leader qualifications use an S131, the Wildland Firefighter Type 1 course, which is 12 hours. And so what happened is we trained up our first crew. We trained 85 firefighters in February of 2020 in Franklin County, Massachusetts, which is out here in the western part of the state bordering Vermont. We have 4 qualified crew bosses, and we told them that at some time in the next 5 years, let's get this resource together. Let's set the bar on this, and probably you'll get used in the next 5 years. We trained them up, and within 3 weeks, 4 weeks actually, they got mobilized on their first assignment, and that was to Joshua Hill in Leverett, Massachusetts. And this shows some of the country, and then also on Tully Mountain, which is a fire that they held at a half an acre up on top of this pretty rugged chunk of ground supporting aviation. And this kind of gives you a snapshot of what those look like. And if you look off to the right on this photo, you'll see the map of Joshua Hill, and it shows the rugged terrain and what the potential for that fire was. And in the end, the use of that crew held that fire to 56 acres. The objective box was drawn out at about 435 acres. And it was really attributed to the training and sort of thinking outside the box and the use of this resource. So my last slide is what were the lessons learned and the takeaways. And here's what I want to emphasize to the audience here today in sharing our story. And that's that you establish those interagency relationships, and guess what? Today's a great time to start. You cannot take too long to start those relationships and getting them on their way. They're all over the board across the landscape. I know of states that have no coordination with their state fire marshal or their state state emergency management agency, and we need to strengthen those. Resist tradition just because it's, quote, always been the way we do things. And those, my friends from the fire service on this webinar today understand exactly what I'm talking about. There's some traditions that are just really difficult to change in the fire service, and we need to resist that. Anchor to tried and tested standards, and we're using NWCG, ICS, NIMS. And that just sets those standards and it gives it some structure. Be good partners and collaborators. And when I'm at that table with my partners here, I'm doing a lot more listening than I am talking. I need to understand what their challenges are in terms of getting to the goal. And all of a sudden that opens up all kinds of opportunities. And then be open and honest about the needs and addressing these problems that everyone really deep down inside knows exists. And that really lends to and everybody's been in this position when you're sitting around that table. People know there's a problem but are somewhat reluctant and afraid to mention it. And that was the key to this. So thank you very much for listening. This is my contact information, the cell phone number there, and I'm open to contact anytime. And I'm going to unshare my screen.
It's really my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Bill Brash. Bill graduated in forest management from West Virginia University before pursuing his master's in environmental science at Montclair State College. He's a wildfire planner with the New Jersey Forest Fire Service, the founder and president of the New Jersey Fire Safety Council, and has really been leading the charge for fire adaptation in the New Jersey area. Welcome, Bill. We're so glad you could join us today.
Well, thanks for asking me, Annie and Emily, and let's get started. So this presentation is strengthening wildfire preparedness and prevention in New Jersey. Hopefully, some of the things that we've learned here in New Jersey transfers and translates to you folks throughout the Northeast and other areas. So those of you who may or may not know about New Jersey, it's 48% forested, which comes as a surprise to most people. But that just tells us that the WUI is everywhere. And we have management challenges based on the vegetation in quite a diverse area. There's 8 million people in New Jersey, and they're living in those 4 million acres. 2 million of them are forested. And a particular concern is the 800,000 people who live in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, and you can see that here outlined in red. And the Pine Barrens are 1.1 million acres. It's a sizable chunk of ground. And if you look at the map here showing population, the Pine Barrens is this area that shows a little bit of less population, with the area to the west being suburbs of Philadelphia, and north and east being the suburbs of New York City. New Jersey is a home rule state, and watching and viewing Dave Celino's slides, I could tell that Massachusetts must also be a home rule state. And that means that we have 566 municipalities across our 21 counties. And New Jersey has a whole level of government that a lot of the country does not have. And that's where most of the activity takes place in those municipalities, which run from about 20 square miles up to 120 square miles. And let me just say that the home rule portion of New Jersey, I think, puts us at an institutional advantage when it comes to preparedness and prevention and how we address wildfire because of the scale. We can be effective at a smaller scale. Some of our FACnet hubs, one in Minnesota, they have a county, Lake County, that's the size of Vermont. I would have a hard time, I think New Jersey would have a hard time trying to deal with that scale in particular. We have a state forest fire agency that's responsible for wildfire suppression. As opposed to Massachusetts, New Jersey, where they have primary response, are responsible for wildfire suppression. We have 65 full-time employees and the ability to call up another 1,500 trained crew members in a large incident. Municipal fire companies that are scattered throughout those 566 municipalities are responsible for structure protection in a wildfire incident. And that's really what the large part of my presentation today will be, to explain that and how we've attempted to better that partnership over the last several years. Forest Fire Service in New Jersey carries out prescribed burn activities throughout the state on public and some private lands with a goal of 20 to 30,000 acres per year. New Jersey has an institutional culture of prescribed burning, and we've been doing it as a statewide agency since the 20s. Here's our problem, and going around the country, I know that everywhere that I've been shares at least some of these same problems. One of them is the Pine Barrens in South Jersey. It has got extreme fuel hazards. Some say in some areas that hazard rating is equivalent to California chaparral. Extreme fire risk. The Pine Barrens is a fire-dependent ecosystem, and some areas have been burned over in the last 100 years a total of 4 or 5 times their entire acreage. So here you can see a map of a community in the Pine Barrens. This one here is Barnegat Township. The red areas are large fires, which is classified by the Forest Fire Service as anything over 100 acres. And so this community, and we'll see another one a little bit later on, has completely burned over 4.5 times. We have vulnerable communities. There's 800,000 people that inhabit the Pinelands. Many of them are in adult communities. If you refer back to that map of New Jersey, the Pine Barrens are kind of in between New York to the north, Philadelphia to the west, and property values are much less in the Pine Barrens. So people leave their homes when they're getting ready to downsize, and they relocate to these retirement homes in the Pine Barrens, and there's thousands and thousands of people that fit that category. And I know that this is an issue no matter where I go, and that is the lack of resource management. And there's a lack of harvesting in New Jersey. The forest industry itself has nearly disappeared, but it hasn't stopped the mortality. We have southern pine beetle in the Pine Barrens, and we have emerald ash borer in North Jersey, and there's thousands and thousands of dead trees out there that have increased the fuel loads to record levels. So we have a lot of fuel out there and a lot of people. And we have staffing shortages, which I know everyone else has. For years, New Jersey had a one part-time staff person. And those of you who may know our current chief, Greg McLaughlin, he was our preparedness coordinator for many years. So as the chief, he understands the issue when it comes to preparedness. So we have these problems. I think many of you share these problems. We sat down and we tried to address those problems by proposing these solutions. And this is what we did. And this was in 2015, after we were invited to join the FACnet, the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. We went out to the meeting in Colorado Springs and listened for 4 days. And we came back to New Jersey and we saw what other people were doing in other locations. We saw what we were doing right, and we saw what we needed to do. And we sat down and came up with a long-term plan. And we insisted on measurable objectives, whether it's increasing acreage of RXB, prescribed burning, how we would do that, how many communities were protected or needed to be protected, how many projects we had working, and then how to build capacity so that we could get those projects done. In that plan, we decided we needed to, and Dave talks about that, invest in partnerships and focused projects based on priorities. One of our coworkers often says that relationships begin projects, good projects, but you can't sustain them without a partnership. And I think that's a pretty good summary. So relationships yield successful projects. Firewise and Ready, Set, Go are an integral part of what we do here in New Jersey for preparedness and prevention. We've established local fire safety councils in at-risk communities. We wrote 45 community wildfire protection plans, and we put priorities in our action plan, and it was critical in how we select our projects. And we entered a partnership with Sustainable Jersey, which is an environmental organization. So we needed to enlarge how we go about doing things, and Sustainable Jersey was an ideal partner because it did the next one, which is to create force multipliers through engagement and training. We established through the Fire Adapted Communities grant programs to us, the New Jersey Fire Safety Council. We trained ambassadors, FAC ambassadors, and those were people that we had relationships with in Firewise, were Ready, Set, Go. we had come across in our community wildfire protection plan efforts, and also fire companies, staff that we had come across that showed an interest in preparedness, wildfire preparedness. So this was what we proposed as our solution. And then what did it result in? We built partnerships with Sustainable Jersey. We also have a partnership with USDA, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, to help expand our prescribed burn program on private lands. We brought county OEMs for training to get some of these municipal fire company folks better trained on wildland incidents. The FACnet ambassadors that we trained, they provide a voice for wildfire preparedness and prevention, and it's one that we did not have prior to. And every one of these projects and programs that we established were supported by, financially and technically, by FACnet. They've been an integral partner in what New Jersey's done over the last 6 years. They write letters, they draft articles, they attend meetings, they help get the message out and establish a voice for the wildfire community. The other thing too is that a plan provides focus. If you establish a plan and you institutionalize it, you put it in writing, if funding comes available, you already have it in writing that you want to do this. Legislators in New Jersey are informed and supportive. And they come sometimes and say, what can we do? Well, if you have a project that you already have on the shelf, you can pull that out and say, here's a project we need some funding for. We have expanded prescribed burn legislation that was a result of that. And we hope that expansion in the legislation allows burning in more locations for other than fuel reduction as well. So we have our priorities, and we need help to implement that. And a plan provides that vehicle. So we identify these at-risk communities. And what do we do then? What's the plan once we have these at-risk communities identified? We go to the residents and we let them know they're at risk. They may know if they've lived there before, they've experienced fire, they may have experienced evacuation, but new residents coming from New York or from Philadelphia may or may not know what their risk is. So they're educated to take action. They're supported through visible risk reduction efforts, whether it's Firewise and what they can do around a home ignition zone, or it's something that the community or a forest fire service can do community-wide. This is a community of mobile homes in Pinewood and Brighton in Barnegat Township. And you can see that this was the 2007 Warren Grove fire. And if you look at these two structures here, those were lost in the fire. So it was determined that this community at Brighton and Pinewood was the highest risk. And so we educated the residents about that. We signed them up for emergency notifications, which is really important. Barnegat Township has a NIXL contact, which is like reverse 911, so that they can get the information about a wildfire or a hurricane incident out to the residents. We conducted a wildfire drill and then a tabletop drill on a Wednesday night. That Saturday, we invited the locals in those two communities to see the results of that drill. And I'll show you some pictures of it. And then once you get the community engaged, you got to complete some on-the-ground fuel reduction projects. You got to let them know that you share their concern and you're doing what you can do. And then you build on these early efforts. And I have to say, for FAC and a Learning Network, they have helped us. They supported us early on, and they helped support us as we built on those early efforts. So here is the residents at Brighton in the drill after the tabletop drill, where they came out, and here's EMS explaining the evacuation plan for that community. And they signed up anybody who had not gotten Nixle sign up to, they did it right there, hands-on. And if you had a disability, whether you your mobility was limited or you had oxygen, they want to know that, because they can send personnel out to assist in the evacuation. Here was the tabletop drill 2 days before that. The community was amazed at the speed at which a wildfire in this vegetation travels, and also how fast the decisions have to be made depending on the proximity of the ignition point that the evacuation order has to go out. It resulted in support by the residents and forest fire and the municipality to a fuel break. Here's a picture of Pinewood, and here's Brighton right next to it. And here's the fuel break that was a result of the drill and educating the residents. Okay, this is on state lands. This piece is owned by the Nature Conservancy. They're in the process of turning it back over to the state. When they do, the state's going to do this and totally construct the perimeter fuel break. That perimeter fuel break is 200 feet wide. So that's on the ground support. In that drill, in the preparation for that drill, and this also was supported by FACnet, we developed a structural protection check sheet. Municipal fire companies are responsible for structural protection in the case of a wildland fire. And so in this case, we actually developed this check sheet, showed the residents. They realized that, you know, they had to do something too. Firewise has a real goal involved in safety, and they can take steps themselves. So after the Brighton and Pinewood fuel break was finished, Roosevelt City and Manchester became the next highest priority at-risk community. We built on that Pinewood Brighton effort. We used the structural protection check sheet training. We went to the residents with a live stream presentation, so they knew we were going to do a drill in their community and not to be alarmed. If they wanted to come see it, they could. And actually the drill emulated a fire 4 months later that was almost exactly the same as the scenario used in the drill. And here's Roosevelt City. Here's the scenario for the drill, ignition point here, and how the fire spread. Here is the Fox Hollow section of Roosevelt City, and where the structural protection check sheet had to be done. We trained 85 municipal firefighters on that check sheet, and I have this PowerPoint presentation available to anyone that wants it. I'll send it to you. We train these 85 municipal firefighters on how to do these home assessments in a case of a wildfire incident. Then we asked them to come out for an ops drill, and 15 fire companies, all of the members had to be to the initial training, came out. We had a morning briefing, of which FAC helped us feed all these fellows for breakfast, and then for lunch afterwards when we had an after action report. We used the check sheet, which you see here, and I have this available for anybody. I'll send it out to anybody that thinks they could use it. And then we went out to the community and we assessed those houses in a case of an incident. And this is the work that was done for the drill, which started at 8 o'clock and ended at noon, and then we fed them lunch. All right. They did a nice job. And the residents came out, and we had an opportunity to educate them about Firewise and what steps they could take to reduce the risk to their homes during a wildfire. And that then led to Roosevelt City fuel break project. The residents were educated to what their risk was, as was Ocean County itself. So they decided what we needed to protect Roosevelt City was a fuel break in addition to the ops drill. So here you have Roosevelt City here. In spring of 2019, we had the Spring Hill fire that made it as far as Route 72 and was stopped. But if it had jumped 72, it would have had a straight beeline for Roosevelt City. That was a focal point. Here's the section. This is Roosevelt City. It's about 1,200 homes. Here's the proposed fuel break project. It's 200 feet wide. It's 5.8 miles long, to be used in the future as an anchor point for the prescribed burning activities to increase the size of the buffer around this community. The county purchased the land surrounding Roosevelt City in 2018. We prepared the plan, took two years. Here's Roosevelt City. You can see the fuel break in yellow. You can see where there's been fires of 10 acres or more in the surrounding area. You can see the red dots are ignition points for fires throughout the years. That's an 11-year timeline there. So this is what the typical vegetation in the area that was used for the fuel break looks like. In some areas, it was 130% of relative density. And you can see the ladder fuels there. If fire got in there, it would be terrible. So we went in and did a fuel break. You can see the burn scars from past fires in here. You can see burn scars from prescribed burning that's occurred as well. And here you can see the line between thinned and unthinned in the fuel break. It was completed this spring after 2 years to get the approvals for the permit. It took about 4 months, 3.5 months to construct the fuel break. So we have plans to continue to build on what we've done with the partnership of FACnet. And we believe that the municipal fire companies have a role to play as we build this program. And that's it for my program, for mine.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate that presentation. So hello, everybody. My name is Emily Troisi, and like Annie, I work for the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and I'm going to invite Dave and Bill to answer a few questions from the audience for a few minutes before we shift to the next portion of our presentation. So, many of the questions that we received in advance of today's webinar actually focused on funding. And so I'm wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about how you have approached funding some of your work. And Dave, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so, and I'll focus on our little project there, a little success story. You know, funding is basically to train that crew up. The funding was materials. It was an unknown. We rely on our state fire assistance annual grant from the Forest Service. And we always are programming funding for training materials and prevention materials, support materials like that. And it's not just for our bureau. It's not just for our staff. It's for us to share with our partners in the local fire service. The next phase 3, if you will, for that system of statewide hand crew resources is that we're going to put 8 hand tool caches in place across the state, strategically placed with our fire districts and our staff for mobilization, and that's being funded by some leftover volunteer fire assistance funds. It fits perfectly into the narrative of both of those funding sources from the Forest Service.
Great. And Bill?
Well, as president of our nonprofit, the New Jersey Fire Safety Council, we receive some state funding for structured projects of which they think we can help, whether it's revising CWPPs, helping to maintain our local fire safety councils, and we receive back funding from the FAC Learning Network, and that goes, it's support funding. Projects originate in municipalities. They originate with the New Jersey Forest Fire Service and sometimes the county OEMs. and we have partnerships with them, and we try to provide what they can't provide. And a lot of times that is publications, and it's food, because believe me, food makes things happen.
Yeah.
It's an important part of getting things done.
Definitely. Thanks to both of you. So we have a question for Bill from the chat box. How much involvement did local fire departments have in developing the 45 CWPPs that you mentioned?
They were critical, and they had extensive involvement in that process. The CWPPs can't be approved without the fire chief signing off on it. I'm sure that's nationwide, but it is in New Jersey. There's a line item for the fire chief who was involved in the process from the beginning to be comfortable with what is in the document before he or she signs off on it.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And a question for Dave. How does the forestry hand crew and local fire department response interact and balance?
Well, first of all, was to get them trained, and then each district will, in district coordinator for the fire mob system, if you will be sort of responsible for those crews as they develop across the state. They actually are in the first one that we're doing here in Franklin County. They're training together. They're training almost to the same standards or philosophy that we put together our out-of-state Type 2 and Type 2 IA crews by structuring it with strong fire line leadership, developing capacity in that regard, and they're even thinking about implementing a fitness standard to keep that crew really successful and to be a true specialized resource in terms of wildfire hand crew application. They actually will mobilize through the statewide fire mob system, which is through the state emergency management agency.
Great, thanks, Dave.
You bet.
And we have got time for, I think, one last question. So Bill, a question from the chat box is, I am curious how the 200-foot wide fire break was created and how will it be maintained near that community in New Jersey you mentioned?
That's a great question. It was done with the forestry mowers. All right, so the actual forest stewardship plan that created a fuel break and was approved by all the agencies was a diameter limit. Anything 6 inches or below was mowed down with a forestry mower, and that fuel break will be used to prescribe burn a buffer much larger than the 200 feet. And then after a couple of years, when compaction from the mower and all the work that was done kind of fluffs everything back up again, that the fuel break itself will be burned to maintain it. And I guess the best way to explain that is the best, I guess, metaphor that I've heard or analogy is after the mower goes through there and flattens everything, it's kind of like you stacking loose leaf paper on top of each other. And if you go to light it on fire, it won't burn well. It won't hold fire. So after a couple of years, it gets fluffed up and you can burn it. So it takes about 2 or 3 years for that to occur.
Thanks, Bill. Well, I'm seeing that we do have 1 or 2 more questions coming in, but for the sake of time today, we need to move on to the next portion of our webinar. So I want to remind folks that both Dave and Bill have put their contact information in the chat box, and I'm sure they would be happy to answer some more follow-up questions. Today, for the next portion of our webinar, we are going to hear from Megan Fitzgerald McGowan from NFPA/Firewise USA and Faith Berry from the U.S. Fire Administration. You will also hear from myself to learn a little bit more about FACnet, and Annie will join us again to share a few other programs and opportunities for you to be aware of. Our goal with these short presentations is to introduce you to some of the programs and resources that are available to you in your work, And we won't have any time for audience Q&A today for this portion of the presentation, but you will get a handout emailed to you next week, along with the recording of this webinar that will have contact info for presenters, along with links for more information about the programs mentioned here today. So I'm going to kick us off briefly by mentioning some of the offerings that FACnet has for fire departments and other FAC practitioners. FACnet is a network of practitioners and researchers who are connecting around fire adapted communities work. I won't get too much into our history or structure because you can review some of that on our website, and I don't have a lot of time today. So what I'd really love to focus on is some of the resources and opportunities that we have available to you that I think you'll be most interested in based on some of your questions from registration. So first, on the right-hand side with the star next to it, I want to mention some of the resources that we have publicly available to anyone, whether you're a member or not. We have a number of resources, tools, stories, and information freely available on our website, such as the Fire Adapted Communities graphic that you can see here with the green and blue concentric circles. We support a number of stories and resources that are by practitioners, for practitioners, and we make these available through our weekly blog and monthly newsletter. There are so many stories from all around the FAC graphic, from public health to resident mitigation to landscape treatments and more. And we feature writing from diverse practitioners with all sorts of job titles and different organizations and lived perspectives to both inspire you and help disseminate practices and programs around the country. So now I want to shift a little bit and focus on a few of our member-specific services. And I just wanted to first mention that anyone that is a wildland fire practitioner can apply on our website to be an affiliate member of the national network, as long as you're working in community wildfire adaptation at a community scale and want to connect with others. So we specifically don't work with individual homeowners or residents who are looking for specific mitigation advice for their property. So on the left-hand side, you'll see peer connection, support, and relationship building. This is a foundational aspect of intentional networks, and we often hear from our network members that being part of a network of peers has been an amazing experience, and they've benefited tremendously from the relationships through the network, and I think you heard a little bit of that reflected from Bill today. Peer connection and relationship building helps generate ideas and practices sharing around the country, can lead to mentorship and more. And we're very intentional in our design for this. Additionally, for our network members, we also have available learning, training, and capacity building opportunities. This can be anything from skills building, such as facilitation training, or FAC-related learning groups, such as our recent Community Wildfire Protection Plan learning group that was centered around revisioning what CWPPs can look like, or our current smoke learning group, which is focused on smoke resilience and FAC work in communities. We design these specifically around our network members' needs, and so the network is adaptable and flexible to meet the request of the practitioners that we help support. Also available to network members is the opportunity and capacity building micro awards. This is offered 1 to 2 times per year through our affiliate member program, and they're small grant opportunities to help push good work forward or give a little additional capacity support to help push a project over the finish line. We've done this a few times over the last couple of years, and we've seen some really great outcomes from some of those mini grants, and so we're excited to continue expanding on those. Lastly, for our network members, we have strategy, collaboration, and coordination support from both fellow network members like Bill, and also from network staff. So part of our staff job is to get to know you and your work and try to provide strategic support when possible. So whether that's reviewing agendas or helping you talk through your FAC strategy with your partners, we're here to be sounding boards and help you think through what would move FAC work forward in your community. And lastly, I'll just say as a reminder, there's no one size fits all approach for fire adaptation, and your community context is most important. So FACnet is here to help connect you to the resources, other practitioners, and the opportunities that might help move your FAC work forward. And we hope to connect with some of you soon. So I'll stop there and I will pass it off to Megan.
Hello, everyone. So my name's Megan, and I work for NFPA with the Firewise USA program. I want to thank Bill for mentioning it throughout his presentation. That was really helpful, and I think it shows like how it is out there. So for those of you who aren't aware, Firewise USA is a recognition program targeted at residents living in those wildfire-prone areas to help them, one, realize that they have a risk and that they have a role to play in managing that risk, and that they and their neighbors should be working together. So the program itself is based in science. The research of retired U.S. Forest Service researcher Dr. Jack Cohen, and then others such as IBHS. And it's all around this idea of the home ignition zone. And that is that the condition of the home and its surrounding landscape are going to impact whether or not it has the chance of withstanding a wildfire. And that whole idea of neighbors is, my property might impact my neighbor's property, and we should work together towards that shared risk reduction. When talking with fire departments and other practitioners, this isn't a program for you to own or to do all the work, but more to facilitate, to help those residents understand that there are steps that they can take. It provides a framework for action. And again, it's all about the residents stepping up. So they have to form a committee. They have to complete a risk assessment, which you might help with, but you don't have to drive it all. They should be very much involved and in pushing it forward. They create an action plan based on that risk assessment that is goals within their community, again, targeted at the condition of the homes and the surrounding properties within that they can work on each year. And they have to do educational outreach. So we have materials and resources that can help with that. And then they have to do things. And I think Bill touched on that. It's not just a hand out some pamphlets program. We require folks to do work to remain in the program each year. So it can be done through volunteer labor, working on your own property and submitting those hours, or through investments such as paying for contractors, shippers, all of that. The program itself helps those residents learn about wildfire in their area, learn about risk and proactive steps they can take. It can help them have that peace of mind knowing that they've done all that they can to improve their situation. Through working with you and others, it's a really good community building program. So we've heard a lot about networking and building that base today, and they can be your ambassadors moving forward, that chance to build some citizen pride. So highlighting the good work that they've done. We use our blog to feature some of those communities in our social media posts. We also have some videos on our website that talk about what the program is meant to folks, but how it's really helped them. It's not the program that's important. It's that end goal of getting people to do the work to improve their situation. And then again, some of those folks might have more access to resources. We have seen in some states that participating in Firewise or a similar program shows that they're committed to the work. So you're more likely to have better success in partnering with them because they are organized and they do have things together. So all of our information can be found on the website that's highlighted there at firewise.org, and that'll be in that handout that comes out. But if you're familiar with other NFPA resources through our public education division, it's the same. We have handouts, we have videos, it's free to you. We do have printed materials. And the whole idea is, again, just getting the word out, having consistent messaging across the different states and regions. So you're welcome to use our materials. That way you're consistent maybe with your neighboring counties, departments, all of that, with that end goal of, again, reaching the residents on the ground. So I think that's probably a good overview, and I'll turn it over to our next person. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Faith Berry, and I'm a fire program specialist with the U.S. Fire Administration. And I want to thank you for your time today to allow us to share and introduce to you the U.S. Fire Administration and the programs, resources, training, and information available to you. The U.S. Fire Administration was established by an act of Congress, the Fire Prevention Control Act of 1974, in response to the 1973 National Commission on Fire Prevention and Control report called America Burning. USFA is a division of FEMA, which in turn is under the Department of Homeland Security and manages many federal programs that you may be familiar with related to firefighting, including the National Fire Incident Reporting System, NFIRS, and the National Fire Academy, and so much more. I'm going to share some information on 4 types of resources available to you at no cost. The first is the tile on the left-hand side, which talks about our WUI webpage. On the webpage, we highlight tools and information that you can actually use when you're working with your community, especially working towards helping your community becoming more fire adapted. We want to stress too that on each page, we include links to other resources and other entities that are working in the field, including the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, NFPA, the National Volunteer Fire Council, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the USDA Forest Service, and more. So you can go to that page, and then from that page, go to other agencies and partners that can provide you with additional resources and information. Some of the new tools on our webpage include links to training, fire adapted communities, how to collaborate, identifying community risk, low cost projects you can do in a weekend or an evening, and data and research, including, for example, research on our NFIRS data and how they're looking at how that type of data can be coordinated with data from MODIS satellites from NASA. So there's lots of information and resources and tools that you can use that we've worked with some of our agency partners to develop that we hope you find helpful and useful. The second tile talks about resources that we have to help you as you're responding to fires to improve fire response as that other part of the cohesive strategy in light of COVID-19. So as you're responding, we have answers to frequently asked questions, and we provide some of the latest guidance for fire response during the pandemic. We have links to wildfire lessons learned, NWCG, and other resources on that page that you can easily access. Also, NFIRS, the world's largest national annual database of fire information that has over 24,000 fire department reporting information, including 28 million incidents, includes a COVID-19 special study that you may find interesting and helpful that has over 6 million COVID-19 records and included that were given to the USFA from fire departments throughout the United States. The third tile refers to outreach materials that we have available to you. These materials can be downloaded for free and used on your social media posts, Facebook and Twitter. They're made so that you can use them on either platform. And some have pictures that are very easy to understand. We also have downloaded flyers on that page that you can download if you want to use flyers for in-person presentations when you do those. Pictographs that you find on our outreach material page are especially helpful if you're working with communities for whom English is not their first language. It's very, very helpful. Please feel free to use this messaging for helping you, including information. We have a little section too on what to do before, during, and after a wildfire. So there are resources, including Twitter posts and Facebook posts, that you can use to help with that kind of messaging. And finally, we have information on training opportunities available. Some of them are virtual, including coffee break bulletins that cover topics to help you with creating a CWPP, engaging with the National Wildfire Cohesive Management Strategy, including the 3 regional committees, And also we worked with Dr. Sarah McCaffrey on developing a piece that helps you to engage better with the public when you're doing virtual or in-person presentations. So there's some tips and resources to help you there with that. We also have training opportunities on campus. The next free training opportunity is the Fire Adapted Communities course, which will be offered in person from January 23rd through January 28th in 2022 as we look forward to the future. So if you have any additional questions or there's something that I haven't covered, please feel free to contact me directly. My contact information is on the slide, and I'll be glad to refer you to whoever in the U.S. Fire Administration can help you get the tools and information you need. Thank you.
We now have an opportunity to ask a few questions. We don't have time for extensive Q&A today, but we did want to highlight some of the questions we received from all of you in advance. And as Emily described earlier, we will also be sharing a short session handout. So as a first question that I'd put to all of the panelists is, what is one highlight or success story from your program that you really want folks to know about?
I can start. So in my role as network staff, I get to support a number of really amazing organizations, and there have been some really amazing stories throughout the network. You already heard from Bill Brash today, but I also wanted to highlight Dovetail's work in Ely, Minnesota, specifically around some of their work with business resilience. And I'll drop a link to a story that features some of that work in the chat box in just a little bit. And given that we have registrants today from 33 states, I would also just like to provide an example of a great FAC success story in Ashland, Oregon, because their pioneering work really kind of embraces what FAC can look like in their community. So there's a number of great stories from them, and I'll drop some links in the chat box, but there's one specifically around their work with HEPA filter grant programs and creating clean air spaces in their communities. And then they also have a great story about passing a wildfire ordinance in their community. And I think Ashland has really embodied the role that a fire department can play in helping to coordinate FAC work. And they've got some really amazing partnerships to learn from the Chamber of Commerce to the Shakespeare Festival, local hospitals, and more that are helping them move this work forward in their communities. And I'd be remiss to not mention the critical role of our Indigenous partners as well, and the work of our colleagues from the Crook tribe, the work that they're doing in California around returning fire to the landscape. So I'll drop a few of those examples in the chat box, and maybe I'll pass it off to Megan.
Hi, thank you. So some success that we've seen lately, a big push from our program has been around the home ignition zone, but the 0 to 5 foot space. Some of the post-fire analyses are really showing that is the critical area for residents, for homeowners to take action, removing all those combustible materials. So our friends at IBHS last year got to go out to the glass fire while it was still going on and visited one of our Firewise communities where a homeowner replaced her bark mulch 2 weeks before the fire with rock mulch. And you can see where the fire burned through the grass and the bark and stopped at the rocks. And that's the things that we're trying to get people to do, those actions that make a difference. And, so that example is in California, but when I was going through renewal applications last year out of New Jersey, one of the communities there, several people did the same thing. They replaced that bark mulch with rock mulch. And it's just so great to see that, because people are getting the message. We do know that does make a difference, that space is so critical for that home survival. So it's these opportunities to share, like, it's not that hard to do. This is a weekend project you can take on, and it makes a difference. That's a big thing. I do have a link for that video that I'll put in the chat box as well, because it's a great resource. It's not very long. So if you are doing outreach, to share with folks. And I'll pass it off to Faith.
Thanks, Megan. I'd like to share that the success stories we hear are those that come from people that have used our programs and others programs and resources, including Firewise and the Fire Adapted Communities, a learning network. And one example that we've created an AMP. It's kind of an interesting way to tell a story. And it's the Surviving a Wildfire, a tale of two communities. So it tells the story of Durango, Colorado, and community Pulaski, Virginia, one on the East Coast and one on the West. Um, and both of them told their story to us. So we've included some video and pictures, and you're free to download it and use it, and maybe it'll help you in the work that you do. But they both worked together with many people in their community. In fact, I thought it was interesting how some very successful communities speak about how they work with everyone, that everyone has a part to play in creating communities that are safer from wildfire. And any community can create their own wildfire success story. And we'd love to hear about yours. Thank you.
Thank you all for those really terrific success stories. It's really helpful, I know, to hear from other communities around the country who are doing this work. I'm wondering if you would all share sort of one underutilized program or resource that you are hoping that those that are on today's webinar will find and utilize.
So I'll start again. I mentioned this already in my presentation, but I definitely wanted to reiterate that affiliate membership is free and open to community wildfire practitioners. We do encourage active participation. So if folks are just looking to take in information, then signing up for our blog or newsletter may be the best option for you. But if you really do want to connect and participate, then affiliate membership is a great option. It's free, and networks really are about reciprocity and showing up to build relationships, to learn and create together. And so folks that put time into getting to know the network and the available opportunities definitely get a lot out of it. We offer a lot of learning, training, and connection opportunities to members throughout the year. And I personally get really excited to see how many people show up to answer each other's questions, cheer on each other's work, help look at draft materials. And so I love when we get new members who are excited to join and connect with others. And I think I'll stop there and pass it off to Megan.
Thank you. So we actually do have a new resource that we posted earlier this year, and it's a tutorial to help a resident or that resident leader for a potential Firewise community learn how to do a community risk assessment very specific to the Firewise USA program. So it matches up a template that we have available, and the whole idea is to empower them, to share the knowledge with them so they can really own what they and their community members are doing. And part of our philosophy here at Firewise is we don't want this to be a burden on those partners and practitioners who help us. So as much as we can put tools out there that can really help the residents take that ownership and take some of that burden off the practitioners, because I know many of you probably wear many hats, and the idea of taking on another program can be overwhelming. But this tutorial, like I said, it's about 30 minutes. They can do it online. It's got interactive portions where they learn to identify strengths and weaknesses within a community. It can help them get the ball rolling. So maybe if you can't get out right away to help them, they can get started. And then once they've kind of gone through and done their own assessment, you can come do that walkthrough with them to kind of verify what they found and what they think are priorities and concerns versus what you as that fire subject matter expert might see as concerns. So that is online, and a link to it, I believe, is included in the handout that will be going out. So I would just encourage you all to check that out and to share it with folks who are expressing interest in they want to start taking action. Thank you, and I'll hand it off to Faith.
Thanks, Megan. I think that's kind of interesting because we also have a type of assessment tool available on our webpage that we find very underutilized that may be helpful to firefighters and communities out in the field working on a community wildfire protection plan. It's a template. It's not an all-inclusive document, but it just provides guidance, and it has downloadable, fillable pages to make it easier for those that have paper phobia. So there's some information on types of agencies that people should include partners that can be included, school districts, businesses, people that people don't normally think of when they're building these types of plans to help them identify work and prioritize work projects that need to be done. And the more people and agency partners that are included in these types of plans, the better the plan and the better the project work that will be implemented. The plans also has links to U.S. Forest Service resources to help identify risk, including the wildfire risk to communities link, land fire, and other links that can be used. And there's also some other nice mapping tools. There are examples and solutions provided in tables. So there's some guidance to kind of help you understand what could be a risk factor and a suggested solution to that risk factor. So we did work with the Forest Service and other agency partners to put together this document. Annie Schmidt helped us as well, and I want to give her a big shout out. So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. I think it was just really helpful to hear a little bit more about all of these terrific programs and the resources that are available to you. And we didn't have time to feature all of the resources that were out there. I know there were some questions in the chat box about training programs. And so I would again invite all of our panelists to take a scroll through and review those questions. But here are a few reminders of organizations that folks may be able to look into and get in touch with. And these resources will be available on the handout that's coming. And just as a reminder, this list is not comprehensive, but do look for the Fire Science Consortium website in your region to sign up for their newsletter or webinars. They do a great job of connecting science and practitioners and offer a lot of free resources. The Wildfire Risk to Communities portal is a free, easy to use website with interactive maps, charts, and resources to help communities understand, explore, and reduce their wildfire risk. It's created by the USDA Forest Service, and they also have a programs list, which has more national programs and opportunities. If you're not familiar with your state's prescribed fire council, if you have one, you should visit their website and keep an eye out for training opportunities, legislative opportunities, and more. Also, with respect to prescribed fire, we have the Prescribed Fire Training and Exchange Program and Cooperative Burns, which provide experiential training that really helps build local capacity for fire management. And it offers our professional fire practitioners a pretty holistic perspective while implementing treatments that support the community and landscape objectives and getting some of those task books signed off. The National Volunteer Fire Council, NVFC, has a number of great programs, grants, and opportunities, and we wanted to highlight one in particular. The Wildfire Assessment Program, or WFAP, is a joint effort between the Forest Service and NVFC to provide volunteer firefighters and non-operational personnel with training on how to properly conduct assessments for homes located in the wildland urban interface. And this is a great program really targeted to volunteers. It specifically prepares them to evaluate a home and provide residents with recommendations. IAFC also has a number of programs and opportunities related to wildland fire. The Ready, Set, Go program is certainly one in which many of you are familiar. They seek to empower fire departments to engage the residents they serve in wildland fire community risk reduction. So working with communities across the country, the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire, or CPAW program, also provides communities with land use planning solutions to help better manage their wildland urban interface. And all of those links and program information will be included in the handout that comes out with the link to this recording.